Hare Om. Welcome. I'm Mathura Das, for those who never seen me before or tuned into one of the live sessions. This is my ninth live session sharing, live stream share. And what I do is, it's a great honor. I say this every time, but it is every day I realize how fortunate I am to be able to share some things with everybody. Some chants, some songs, and a story. And the story is a big historical story involving the coming together of East and West and how I got the name Mathura Das. And I will explain that after I've done the three Oms, prayers to my teacher and my spiritual lineage. Then I will do chants and songs, and then I will do the story. And then at the end of my talk, I will give another song, share another song. And okay, well, thank you. This is how I'm going to start. Om is universal. My mother, who was even kind of agnostic, rational humanist, you could say, she had her own version of spirituality. She loved Om. And I've got some fabulous stories with my mum and chanting Om, and it's a very universal form of meditation and connecting with the divine and with your inner self. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jananyana Salakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Gadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Juta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sahagrajatam Sahaguna Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahaguna Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Shri Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Brindavanishwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhara, Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda, Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhara, Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda, Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vas Adigo Bhakta Vrinda Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhaiva Cha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare. Because I'm using this guitar in this type of share. Um, I've I've only got a limited kind of repertoire of what I do in terms of chants on the guitar. I might have to learn a few more. There are lots of things I could possibly do with the mridanga, but I might do that in the future. But for now, I'm going to do the song that a lot of people like, and it has a nice little instrumental in beginning and a little break, and it's quite pastoral, and it's to take you into that transcendental land of Braj where Krishna resides with his associates Brijbasis and has his wonderful pastimes on earth and in Nitya Goloka, the eternal realm. And Radhi is the name of Radha, the goddess, the counterpart to Krishna, and he has many names. And Krishna and Govinda. Govinda means he tends the cows, and he has all of his other associates, like his parents and his cowherd friends and all the other residents. And then there's also the wonderful place where this is taking part. There's in Gita Govinda, famous poem by Jayadev from the 13th century, there's a beautiful description in Sanskrit describing the scene in Vrindavan before introducing Radha and Krishna. And there's the Jamuna River, there's the beautiful Kadamba trees, there's a beautiful scent carrying the Malaya, the smell of sandalwood in the air, and it's a divine setting. And so let's go off for a little while into that world, and join me and chant in Radhi Radhi Govinda, basically, and a whole bunch of Radhes, and some Hare Krishna will come into it as well. Radhi Govinda Govinda Radhe, Radhi Radhi Govinda Govinda Radhe, Radhi Radhi Govinda Govinda Radhe, Radhe Radhi Govinda Govinda Radhe, Radhe Govinda Bolo Radhe Govinda, 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 Radhe Radhe Govinda Govinda Radhe, 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 Radhe Govinda Bolo Radhe Govinda. Radhe Radhe Govinda Govinda Radhe, 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 Radhe Govinda Bolo Radhe Govinda, 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 Radhe Radhe Govinda Govinda Radhe, 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 Radhe Govinda Bolo Radhe Govinda, 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 Radhe 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 Jai Shri Radhe, Radhe Govinda Bolo Radhe Govinda, Radhe Govinda Bolo Radhe Govinda, Radhe Radhe Govinda Govinda Radhe, 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 Radhe Govinda Bolo Radhe Govinda. Krishna Kanhaiya Lal Ki Jai, Radharani Maharani Ki Jai, Vrindavana Dhama Ki Jai. I'm going to sing a Shiva one now, especially for my lovely friend Jean, my artist friend, and You can also join into this based on the pentatonic blues scale. Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Bolo Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Gangadarai Shiva Gangadarai Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Gangadarai Shiva Gangadarai Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Someshwarai Shiva Someshwarai Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Someshwarai Shiva Someshwarai Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Jata Darai Shiva's Jata Darai Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Jata Darai Shiva Jata Darai Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara 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 Bole Namah Shivaya Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Ganga Darai Shiva Ganga Darai Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Ganga Darai Shiva Ganga Darai Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Namah Shivaya Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Namah Shivaya Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Jata Darai Shiva Jata Darai Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Jata Darai Shiva Jata Darai Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Vishveshwarai Shiva Vishveshwarai Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Vishveshwarai Shiva Vishveshwarai Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Mahadev. Jai Shiva Shambhu Bholanath. Pranams. So lovely to share that. And it's amazing. I'm just we're in this virtual space. I'm sitting at home, but I just feel we're all together, and hope you feel that I'm with you, and we're all together. That's what my talk's been all about, hasn't it? Really, I mean, whoever's been following my talk, the 60s, it was all about come together and let's work together, and it was all about trying to build an alternative to what we were born into, because it was all very dissatisfactory, and we could see where it was heading, to the situation we've got now, world with full of pollution and crap and shit and consumer mindlessness, all the kind of things that all the hippies were very kind of wanted to make a change in the world, but somehow or other the big powers that be consumed a lot of our ideals. Many people, though, in terms of many of the hippie ideals have infiltrated into society, and most probably saved it from going really off the end. And many people dropped out and did wonderful things, built alternative houses and lived in places before stringent laws and things came in America. And a lot of people have been experimenting with alternative living, and so lots of things have gone on that level in the world. Okay, so back to my specific story. And for those who are just tuning in, this is a story about the marriage between, or the coming together of East and West, specifically which leading to the infiltration of spiritual and knowledge coming from India for the first time, very first time at the end of the 18th century, and then kind of speeding up, picking up in the 19th century, certain characters being involved. It's primarily in the capital of British Raj, India, Calcutta, and that side is called Bengal. And there was a culture there coming from Sri Chaitanya, who was born in 1586, and that's a specific branch of that lineage that Kedaranath Dutt, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, had a vision that this spiritual path that or tradition that had been inaugurated that time was actually had relevance for the whole world, and he had that vision, and he went on a mission and set things in motion. His son Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati carried things further, established an organization called the Gaudiya Math, sent some of his students even in the late 30s to Europe, had some modicum of success, but the time wasn't very ripe for what was going to happen a few years down the line, and that was going to happen through Bhakti Vedanta Swami, a disciple of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, the founder of the Gaudiya Math. And at the ripe old age of nearly 70, he arrived in America in the age of 65. And what I've just explained to you is the partial story of the history of what I call the Hare Krishna ripple effect, a historical process I call ripples. That started about 5,000 years ago in the Himalayas, with the sage called Vyasa went through many historical transformations over the years in India. And this more kind of medieval Renaissance in a kind of modern part of that Vedic story was inaugurated by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and then went into the next phase of modernism. And the other historical process, because these are the things that converged in my life and created me and how I got the name Mathuradas, because I'm not born in India, I'm born in southwest London to middle-class parents in the late 50s, and atheists and agnostics, nothing to do with religion or God or anything. How did that come about? And that was a lot of that to do that brought me that these historical ripples converged in my life. It was this psychedelic ripple that had started in 1945, specifically with Albert Hoffman, a doctor in Sandoz Laboratories in Switzerland, who inadvertently or through magic created LSD 25, which was going to make inroads very softly at the beginning and then explode. And I've just been explaining in the last two shares the details of what that entailed, and it's great to get the dates. If you haven't heard that, I would recommend that you go back there. When I've done these transmissions, I am going to create a list of books that you can read, or even just videos. There's tons of videos and documentaries you can go, and so what I am saying will have more relevance, because at the moment I haven't got my PowerPoint presentation together with all the images of all the characters, so you're just depending on what I'm telling you. But when you actually see the persons, it makes more and more sense, actually, how these things came about. I finished my talk yesterday where it's Thursday. I should be out there clapping for all the NHS people, but I'm clapping. We can all clap here at homes, can't we? We can go clap, 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 clap. If you by a window, go outside. All on, we offer all respects to all the frontliners and the medical people, what they're doing. It's fantastic. That was incredible. That just happening now. Okay, so there I am. I'm in England, and I've gone through this whole journey, and I've just discovered that I might be on something called a spiritual path through a discussion with my cousin. This wasn't really clear until around this time, but I was getting very dissatisfied with school. I'd got kicked out of my Hampton school. I was now magically got accepted at Holland Park Comprehensive, a very liberal school in Kensington. John Mayall's son, Gaz, went there, and Mark Gilmore, the brother of Dave Gilmore from Pink Floyd, who I became close with in that 1 year, and lots of interesting people. In fact, on my first day there, I was a kind of newie there, but they checked me out. I had, and everybody had kind of quite long hair and stuff. And as soon as we had been introduced, they said, do you smoke pot? And it was like, yeah, come on, let's all go. And I went to the park, and it was just like, wow, talk about a difference between Hampton School. Holland Park was right next door, and everybody was just smoking pot. And you had long hair, and it was like another world. It was a complete difference. It was another world. So I went through a journey, but really, even though it was alternative, I lost quite a lot of interest. But I'd started this whole thing of reading. And I started with Politics of Ecstasy, Timothy Leary. That was where I started kind of the word consciousness and God. But it was really Hermann Hesse, this German writer, who I just read nearly every book that he had written at that time, and I just couldn't put them down. And also very interesting at that time were the first two books of Carlos Castaneda, who had gone down to South America and met a Yaqui Indian shaman called Don Juan, allegedly. Anyway, it's a fantastic book. And then he wrote a separate book called second book called A Separate Reality, which I even enjoyed more. It was very interesting. And I was kind of getting into that and delving into that. And then there was this book also that I got from the library at school called Varieties of Religious Experience by William James. And it was like, okay, there's so many different types of kind of altered states of consciousness, connections with the divine. It's this big subject. I just started on it. And around this time also, I went with my friend Mick, who I mentioned in the last book. We were walking around London, and we'd booked tickets for this really far out music show called, it was a Japanese guy called Shitoma Yomashito and the Red Buddha Theatre. And it was an incredible performance, stunning. And I got all into this stuff via Mick. Most of my other friends I wouldn't have done this with, but Mick was sussing out what were interesting things that we could check out. And that was really, really brilliant. And I think the day we booked the tickets, we were walking around and we passed this cinema, and there was an advert for a movie. And I thought it was just, didn't really get what it was going to be about, but it was called Brother, Sun and Sister Moon. It had a kind of picture of a medieval knight, and so I thought it was about something chivalrous, and we both went in. And I had this aversion really to religion, and specifically Christianity, and I hadn't resonated with any of the RI classes or anything that I'd heard about it. In fact, maybe a year or so before, I'd been with my close school buddies, my gang, and we had been on our bikes, and we had been in St. James's churchyard having a fag. And there's this church there, looking up at the spire, and somehow the talk came around to religion and God. And because I come from a very strong atheist family, I didn't realize that some of my friends' parents and they had slightly different beliefs, and they even, I think one of them even admitted to praying, and I was like aghast, and I just kind of poo-pooed the whole thing, and because my father had Darwin's theory of evolution that solved the whole God story completely, no discussion anymore. God. Phew. That's for losers, boring old straight squares, something that we have to leave behind in this modern world. That's what I thought. And then I think I remember saying something bizarre like, well, it was not bizarre. I just said something like, okay, so even if there is a God who created everything, so what? Why do we have to build this church and do all this stuff? Why did he create? He must have made us to be free and do what we like. Why do we have to kind of worship him and create this religion and stuff? That just came out the top of my head, and it is a good question, though, isn't it? So that was happening a little bit earlier. So this kind of religion and spirituality. So I walked into the cinema, Brother, Sun and Sister Moon by Franco Zeffirelli. And it was doing actually the rounds with Romeo and Juliet at that time. It was in 70s, early, I think this was 72, yes, I think. And the music is by Donovan. It's funny because, okay, I'll explain to you what happened to me in the cinema and tell you what film critics think about it. It's beautifully set, filmed near Assisi, in Italy, in beautiful kind of authentic buildings and settings, and I'd never really allowed myself to even expose myself to anything vaguely Christian, but I'd just now become open to all of these spiritual things. And I'd been reading Be Here Now. And so I'd been open to kind of various spiritual things. And we walked into their cinema, and there was a couple of scenes in it where something happened. I kind of went into some kind of sympathetic resonance with St. Francis of Assisi. There was specifically the amazing scene where he takes off all of his clothes and gives this incredible speech and gives them back to his father and walks out of the gate of the town. And there's a scene where it has the dilapidated church in the valley with the kind of Byzantine mosaic with the face of Christ kind of a bit dilapidated. And while this was all happening, something happened to me. I can't really describe it. It was just like all I can say is like a feeling of grace. Something came over me, and I kind of gasped. And it was quite physical as well. I'd never experienced anything like that. It was like I was almost feeling what Saint Francis had been feeling. And I tuned into it. It just, the incredible aesthetic sense and the kind of devotion that Zeffirelli had put into this was his great spiritual hero, St. Francis, and he got the inspiration while being in a hospital, and he'd wanted the Beatles to do the soundtrack, and he wanted to actually present St. Francis like the original flower child, love and peace. And so he got Donovan, who was actually much more appropriate, and there's some beautiful soundtracks to it. And when we walked out of the cinema in the middle of London, we just we couldn't speak. We were both speechless, and it just continued. We went down the tube, sat on the tube, and every time we looked and thought we should speak, we couldn't, because the film had affected us so much. We were just zapped. We got zapped by St. Francis. It was a kind of God conscious experience. It was a bhakti experience. This is what I was going through this process. I was trying to figure out all these different various things that were on offer. I call it like a smorgasbord, like a kind of, I couldn't distinguish and between the different paradigms that all these different spiritual paths kind of evoked. Now, there was this thing, kind of a book that Aldous Huxley had written. I actually didn't read it at the time, but it was kind of referred to in this term, the Perennial Philosophy, which is an interesting term. And what I've noticed through my research is that it's not as broad an understanding as, say, William James's Varieties of Religious Experience. The Perennial Philosophy tries to make an assumption that behind all forms of mysticism is this very specific kind of non-dual experience with the Godhead. And this was everything I read basically was tinged by this way of seeing things, or the kind of basic philosophy or kind of gist of what I was getting from reading, the psychedelic experience, what Leary was saying. Leary's in Politics of Ecstasy, he'd been trying to explain all these various levels of consciousness and giving different terms to them. Different people and traditions and different systems have tapped into these various levels of consciousness and given them different names. There's a similar thing that goes on in the Kabir tradition, which I'm going to mention now, because at that time in 1971, when the Glastonbury Festival happened, a character appeared on the scene who had quite a very big influence on the psychedelic scene, and that's this subsect of the psychedelic voyagers who were interested in Eastern spirituality. And this was Prem Rawat Singh, or known then commonly as Guru Maharaji, who actually from the Dehradun area, and born into a family that his father was a guru of a branch of a tradition in India, and he'd been groomed since being a child. He'd been groomed. I've seen pictures of him as a young boy on stage, and he had charisma. Sorry, he'd been educated at public school. He had brothers. That's a whole bunch of their story going on, and he could talk to a massive crowd of thousands and thousands of disciples. Especially, a lot of the followers are in North India. And it's an interesting tradition. It's a tradition that follows from a kind of medieval character, kind of almost the same time as Chaitanya. Had a big influence on Guru Nanak and the Sikhs. His name was Kabir. And I'm not going to get into too much difference. But Kabir, it was an interesting form of kind of... it was in between the extreme Advaita monism of Shankara and the Bhakti schools. And it's got its own specific name. It's called Nirguna Bhakti. And some people say that Tulsidas, who wrote Ramcharitmanas, the Hindi form of Ramayana, he was kind of akin to this school. It's called Nirguna Bhakti. This is all quite technical, but we're going to get involved. This is going to have to come out now in this talk, a little bit of theology, because this is me getting closer and closer to this Krishna thing, which I haven't quite contacted yet. But Guru Maharaji, there's a very interesting book by a friend of my friend who was a disciple of him for 30 years called Without the Guru. And he had gone to India in the late 60s, early 70s and met Guru Maharaji. A couple of foreigners had gone, and he was very young. He's actually the same age as me, born in 1956. He was a young boy, and so he was only about 16 when he arrived, but he had inherited this mantle. And he was the kind of the person that the family was promoting. I think his father had died. That was the reason. And anyway, they brought it all coincided. This story, it's explained in this book, how they did it and how they got Guru Maharaji from India and brought him to this Glastonbury Festival. And he made his debut appearance on stage at the Glastonbury Festival in 71. And it's interesting because from that point, it kind of attracted a lot of people because he was offering a kind of a form of meditation called the knowledge. And it was a thing where you could see something, hear something, and taste something. And that whole, it's not that he just made that up. That is a part of this meditation techniques. Maybe he'd modified it and his family, but it's connected. It's got its roots in Kabir. There's also another tradition that's kind of similar. That's an offshoot of Sikhism. Orthodox Sikhs don't specifically always accept them. It's the Radha Swami sect, and they perform a similar type of meditation technique to that of Guru Maharaji and his tradition. Okay, so after this festival, they had quite a lot of followers, and everything seemed to happen very quickly at that time. And I was living in southwest London, and there were suburbs there, and I sometimes used to go up into central London. And the first time I saw Krishna devotees, the only time I saw Krishna devotees, seen them, was when I went up to Portobello Road. And this was just before I got involved in the spiritual thing. And when I saw them down the streets, because I'd only seen them on Top of the Pops in 16, it freaked me out, actually. I mean, the last thing I thought was that I would join a group that these people were part of and do what they were doing, chanting down the street with robes on, shaved heads, which is like, shave your head. Hair was everything. And there's a funny mark on their forehead, and doing it in public. I thought, my goodness, I was aghast. I actually was so embarrassed. I hid behind a clothes store. I was too kind of freaked out to watch it directly. I just had to kind of peep at it. That's how much a kind of effect it had. So I'd hardly really met anybody that was really into spiritual group, did meditation, except for Bob the Beard. I hadn't met anybody else or these groups. But then one day, I met some followers of the Guru Maharaji people hanging outside Twickenham Odeon. And they were handing out these leaflets and inviting people to come to a satsang in the Twickenham area and come and take it out. So satsang was like a gathering, and I had it and I looked at it and I wasn't really sure. And I remember showing it to my friend Mick Pitt. And he said, "Oh, be careful. I've heard a few things about that. I wouldn't be." He was all very, very cautious because there was this other group, I think in London, around the Children of God. It was a kind of a Christian a sect, and they had this kind of guy, their leader called Moses, and they were out on the street. And so there was this thing, Jesus people, they were called like the Jesus people, and then you had Guru Maharaji. And the Hare Krishnas were very small. So what had actually been happening behind the scenes with the Krishna movement is that I mentioned that George Harrison brought the Hare Krishna single and brought it to the Isle of Wight festival. And that was in August 1969. And just after that, they'd made this connection with the Beatles, and John Lennon had recently, kind of not long before, moved into Tittenhurst in his big pad that you see in that movie, Imagine. And it's a big pad with lots of grounds, and he had a kind of gatekeeper, not a gatekeeper, but the person who looked after the land. There was a special house there that had been built there, and he had kind of offered this to the Krishna devotees to come from, because and he offered his Rolls Royce to pick up Prabhupada, the white Rolls Royce, from the airport. And I think it was the 19th of September 1969 that he arrived. And there's a famous picture you see of the Beatles taken literally maybe a week or two just before this happened. And I think it was Abbey Road time, and they're all kind of like standing outside this door. And it's of this house where Bhaktivedanta Swami and the other Krishna devotees were going to be put up by John Lennon. And John Lennon, remember that they had been a bit his experience anyway had been a bit ambiguous with the whole Maharishi story, and he was, he had a bit of a thing now about gurus, and he was with Yoko, who had a very strong influence on him, and it was more really through the influence of George that I mean, they'd met the Krishna devotees, all of them, Paul and John and everybody, and they could see that some Krishna devotees were quite cool, some were really a bit wacky, and they weren't quite sure. But then they had met Prabhupada. So he arrived and he stayed there, and there's some very interesting recordings. You can hear them. Conversations with John Lennon, George Harrison, Yoko, and Prabhupada on, I don't know if it's that very first day, but it's very soon after he just arrived. And it's a fascinating story because I quite found the art question by Yoko to be quite interesting. It was John Lennon said, after Prabhupada had talked and given an introduction, John Lennon had said, well, Maharishi says the same thing about his mantra, and everybody says the same thing. What's the difference with yours? And before even Prabhupada could answer, George kind of interjected, and he goes, I think it's a bit like flowers, You have different flowers. Somebody likes a daffodil, somebody likes a rose, somebody likes a tulip, and it's a matter of choice. And Prabhupada immediately takes up George's example, and he makes an interesting point, a very interesting point. He says, yes, you may be attracted to this flower, and you may be attracted to that, but a rose actually has intrinsically more qualities than just the color of a daffodil or something. It has that, but even though you might choose that's your choice. And that was an interesting point. And then the other point was Prabhupada was trying to bring in this thing that was it's going to be a moot point, because as we've been explaining about the 60s and what was happening there, it was all very anti-authoritarian. Basically, it was a reaction against authoritarianism and people wanting to be free and develop different ways of being. Everyone was sick of being controlled, this very top-heavy hierarchical form of existence that the world was under. And then suddenly Prabhupada comes in, who's the same age as my grandfather, but quite very traditional, but right into the mix of hippies and also the bohemians and the artists and the intellectuals of the people who are right on the cutting edge of the kind of questioning authority. And there he is, kind of being an authority and talking about the fact that what he is talking about it's because it's coming from an authority. He has a guru, and his guru has a guru, and his guru has a guru, and there's a text called the Bhagavad Gita, and there's these books, and these books are authoritative. And it's a very interesting part of the whole story, this whole thing about authority. But like Yoko said, so what's this thing with authority? Are you kind of born with it? who has it? I thought that was a good point. Uh, uh, she wasn't really having it. I don't think she grabbed onto the point of what Prabhupada was saying. But anyway, there you go. Prabhupada's there. He's come. He's met George Harrison, and George is quite impressed. And George Harrison develops over the years a very um, um, stronger and stronger relationship with an appreciation for Srila Prabhupada. And it's mostly Shama Sundar who has got the close friendship with George Harrison. And you have to read his books, Chasing with the Rhinos, to get all the extremely good details. And also Branshaw has written a book about Krishna in the England, and it's called Where the Sun Shines, I think it's called. I'm sorry if I have got the wrong name there. But there's all these... So from Shama Sundar and those early Krishna devotees, they kind of stayed there and they did some work on John Lennon's house, and they were around, and they got very close. They got the English devotees first time they met the Prabhupada. I mean, Kulashekar, when I met him, when he described his first encounter with Prabhupada, it was just... this non-different, non-seeing God. I mean, he just saw kind of like light radiating from him. He was golden, and Kulashekar felt kind of like tears coming down his eye. Many devotees, when they met Prabhupada, would have these types of experiences because he was who he was, and he had incredible spiritual potency. And somebody said that when they saw when Yoko and John had seen actually how simple Bhaktivedanta Swami was, he didn't, wasn't expecting some big cushy thing. He had a very simple thing to sleep on and everything. And apparently Yoko had said to John, do you think you could live like that with hardly any possessions? Like that to John, and apparently, that was part of the inspiration for one of that line in Imagine, about having possessions. I imagine if can you really imagine what it's like to have no possessions? I wonder if you can. Okay, so that was happening at that time, and gradually the Krishna movement there. Another kind of American devotee went to Germany at that time. Just one Krishna devotee, and then gradually somebody else went to Paris. This was all happening around 1970, and gradually the Krishna movement was expanding. But for me, it wasn't very visible. Like I said, I'd seen them on Portobello Road, but they weren't kind of like hundreds of them going out. They weren't as visible as the Guru Maharajas were in my suburb giving out their stuff. But I didn't go to a satsang of Guru Maharaji, and I found out more about him and his stuff later. Because, so then what happened was it came to the end of my year at Holland Park and the taking of mock O-levels and O-levels, and I just wanted to get them out of the way. What I was really looking forward to, I was hoping I would get some basic passes, so that would be the minimum. I only needed 2 O-level passes to get do a foundation course, because I thought, well, I just don't know really what I'm meant to be doing, but I can just follow what Nick did. And so I'm going to go and do an art foundation course, because I was good at drawing and painting, at Isleworth Polytechnic, if I can get these 2 O-levels, and finish those O-levels. On the day I did my last O-level, I went with my friend Mick Pitt, and we decided to go off to this free festival that had already started in Devon called Trenti Show. And also... the year before, actually, in 72, because now we've passed 72. In 72, there'd been a little festival in Windsor Park, the very first one. And it was actually about 300 people. Windsor Park is the royal park right near Windsor Castle in the town of Windsor. And there was this, it's a big park. And the first Windsor Festival was just really 300 people under this little mound of trees and everybody banging bongos. And it was a very small affair. But 1973, as we passed into 1973, this is where I was now at this time in my life. I was in my 16th year, going on to 17. And reading all these books, getting totally obsessed with spirituality, and starting to do a bit of meditation and yoga. And then leaving, and I kind of read Be Here Now, but I re-borrowed it from Bob because I wanted to take it on, while I was going traveling. And Mick was reading The Idiot by Dostoevsky. We were so hip. And we hitchhiked down to this Trenty Show festival, but we couldn't get lifts. So we separated. We said, we'll just meet you there. And as soon as we separated, I got a lift quite quickly. That took me almost a lot of the way there. And then the last lift I got was with a bunch of hippies who'd already been there, gone to do some shopping, and they picked me up. And I was all there crammed with a bunch of people. And I arrived on site, and I just got out, walked in, and the first person I met was a Hare Krishna devotee who was really friendly. And he said, "Hey, Hare Krishna, welcome to the festival." And I had a guitar on my back, and he said, "Are you with the band?" And, I looked so young, and I said, no. And he said, "Oh, anyway." And he says, it's the last night tonight. And I went, "Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, never mind." He says, "Look," and he was so nice. He said, "Look, you see that tent down there? Please come. We're giving out prasadam, free food. Come and check us out. We're down there. Welcome." And I walked in and I went, I thought that was really nice. They seem really friendly. And I kind of wandered around and checked things out a little bit. And he said, "Oh yeah," he said, "we're going to be on stage a bit later, just doing something, And I just sat down, and I hadn't figured out where to stay. I hadn't put up my tent or anything. And as you did at these festivals and these lovely hippie spaces, this was all kind of same mood that had happened in the summer of '67 in San Francisco. We were still experiencing this really in England when you got away and had these free festivals. It was a carry-on from that vibe. It was the same thing. We were just younger. It took me a few years to catch up to get involved in these things. And it was quite big, the alternative scene in England, even though this free festival, just put on by hippies, was not very, very big. And I sat down, and there was a few people there, and there was like, "Hi man, hi man." Everyone was rolling joints and having talks, and someone passed me a joint, and I rolled a joint, and I passed it there, and we went round, and we just sit there, And there were these really cool guys, the guys next to me from South Africa, who had just been living in a cave down there for a month or so, in the summer. I thought, "Gosh, you guys, that's cool, man, respect, kind of, not that I use that word." And we just made friends. And then the Hare Krishnas came on the stage. And I'd never really kind of, I'd gone through the spiritual, it wasn't the same as watching them in down in Portobello Road. And there was just, I think, 3 of them, that's it, with the drum and some cartels. And I started listening to it and tapping, and it was the first. I joined in, I chanted Om before. This is the first time, but there was something. Well, as I was chanting it, I was going. There was all sorts of intellectual things coming in, kind of like theological considerations that I was trying to figure out at this time. Was like, okay, there was this kind of Zen emptiness type of approach to meditation, stopping thoughts, being still. And then there was this dancing, moving about thing, mantras. It was this kind of much more proactive. And I just couldn't quite figure out how they met and how they related, but I was enjoying it. Whatever it was really good. I enjoyed that. I liked the mantra. That worked. That did something. That made me feel good. So then I went back to this kind of makeshift bender, what they call benders now. These guys had made this thing next to a stone wall with bits of wood and polythene. It was quite big, and they had straw on the floor, and they welcomed me there. And we all got really stoned. And I just went a bit like I am now, not much different, just on a rant. And because they asked me about things, and all this stuff that I'd been into for a year just came out of me. And they were just like, I realized I'd read more books than they had. I'd done it all in one. I'd done a crash course on spirituality in 1 year. And it was just like, and they were like, "Okay, cool." And anyway, crashed out. And in the morning, when I woke up, they'd all gone. I was just me. I hope I hadn't scared them away. And I woke up, went out the tent, and the first person I saw was, what's his name from Hawkwind? Nick Turner, that's it. I went over, there was a little kind of long kind of gutter with some taps, and I went over there, and he looked at me, and he winked at me. It was like, hey lad, welcome to the festival, And I felt really good. wandered around a little bit. There was a guy not called Magic Mike, he was called something else, but he had been in India, and he had a kind of a dreadlock tied up, and he had a rose in the top, and he was just sitting making burgers and free food and giving it out, and he had that picture from the Quintessence album, the inside there, and I just sat down there and heard the banter and was just checking it out. And it was just after that, when I walked away, I met my friend Mick, who had arrived the night before. We hadn't met up, and it was like, hey, hey, hey. And then we both realized the festival was over, and we were going to go. We're just going to go off on this walk. So we didn't have anything really planned, and we did this, I would never have done it later in days, but we forgot to get our stash of hash kind of topped up while we were there. We didn't really think about it, and we went to the local town, and Ilfracombe, or whatever it was there at that time. There was 2 different towns we were going to go to, and there was this. We ended up at a campsite, and we met this really nice guy from Wales, and we became really good friends. And we thought, we'll just camp here for the night and figure out what we're going to do to go from there. And he lived in Wales and told me all about this place where Quintessence, the group, used to go. It was a kind of retreat, and he said, they had this guru, their Swami, or whatever his name was, and they do yoga, and and I just heard about this, and I thought, oh God, this is really what I want to do. I'd love to kind of like just drop out and go and live in the countryside with a kind of commune with members of Quintessence and do chanting and yoga. And that was in my head, and I'd read Be Here Now, and that was a kind of a dream that I kind of fantasy, that I would meet these really cool people somehow or other, and get, and drop out really, and okay, art college, who knows, but that's really kind of what I wanted to do. And so that was interesting, and then we carried on walking, and for a couple of days we walked. We just camped where we were, and it felt like being sadhus, really. We'd wake up out of the tent, I would do some yoga, we'd go into the town, just get a little something to eat. He'd read his book, I'd read his, we'd have great talks. I felt quite mature. It was really a bit quite different than my journeys to Glastonbury. I was on a different stage. I'd had all this training and education, because basically my education at school had been so oppressive and suppressive. So I kind of put my kind of learning, my brain learning things had just kind of it stopped. I'd stopped, it was just these alternative things. And then suddenly, with all this literature of Hermann Hesse and all this knowledge and information, I just drunk it all up, basically, when I discovered this spiritual trip and the joy of reading books, and how incredible all these poets and deep people, they have all these experiences and they share it through the form of literature, so that you can kind of take the time to, and they've taken so much time to express all of this and share it. And I just started to value all of this, and so I just kind of matured quite a lot, really, and quite rapidly in that crash course during that year. And so then one evening, as we were walking, it started to get raining, and we were drenched, and we wanted to find the nearest campsite, and it was miserable. Everything, we got the tent out, it was wet, we got inside, things were, it was dripping, and it was a bit of a bummer, and we tried to go to sleep, and we kind of slept for a little bit, and then we woke up after a bit of sleep, and we just went, because we were on this spiritual trip, and it was like, why are we allowing this situation to bring us down? We don't have to, do we? No, we don't. We got to. So what should we try? And we just went, let's try bhakti. Let's experiment. Let's see what happens. So we both started singing, "Oh, happy day." We started doing it, and we immediately started to feel good. We started to invoke happy vibes. And we started to actually pack up, and dawn had come, light was coming. We started to squeeze out our kind of drenched things, but with good spirit. And we went from that to "My Sweet Lord." Very simple, because the melodic structure is quite similar, and even George Harrison said that was a bit of inspiration from "My Sweet Lord." And then, of course, "My Sweet Lord" goes into Hare Krishna. And we just didn't stop with the Hare Krishna. We just carried on with Hare Krishna. And we were just doing this thing, packed up our stuff, started to walk to this town that we were going to go to. And we just started, and years later, after I hadn't seen Mick for many, many, many years, we went back to this day, and it wasn't just me. He also experienced something quite fantastic this day, because we'd both been on a spiritual path. He'd been searching, I was searching, and we discussed things. As we started to chant, we were just looking at, we all had this thing, we're not going to, have to talk or comment, we're just going to carry on doing it and just get into it. And as we started, we were going down these country lanes, typical West Country lanes of England, narrow streets with big hedges. And as we came round one corner, gradually, suddenly, the clouds broke and the sun shone down, and it was like something out of a movie, the synchronicity with our mood. And when it happened, we just looked at each other, we went, yeah, and we were we're going, what the fuck? We're dancing down this road like, we're intoxicated. We weren't high on any drugs. We were just chanting this mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. We were singing like that and chanting this melody. And we got into this blissful state. We just kind of didn't know. The time just went, and we suddenly arrived at this town before sunset, in early evening. Found this campsite, and lo and behold, there were these people that Mick knew from Bradford, who he'd met. He'd gone up there and stayed at a commune. They just happened to be there on this campsite, and they were right at the end. And there was a couple of other hippies, and they'd created a nice little space. And guess what? They had really good hash and orange sunshine acid. But we didn't take it that night. We got high on hash, and it was just like, yeah, we'd gone on our little journey, did our kind of sadhu thing, and now we were with the tribe again. And Mick decided to take some orange sunshine that day, and he was high in a beautiful way, and he was reciting poetry. I'd never seen him in such an incredible state ever in my life, because he was quite a shy person, and he was in his best, and he was just and everyone was saying this acid was just the best. So I thought, okay, I'll do it tomorrow. I'm convinced. Okay. And I think I hadn't really tripped for ages before this, because I decided that I had a bit of reverence, and I wasn't taking it. I was taking it much more seriously. And so the next day, a group of us all took the acid again, and we went down to this estuary, and we crossed the estuary and went up the side onto this other side, and went up into these fields and this kind of wood, and I was coming up on the acid, and I suddenly had this, I said, everybody, I've just got to go into the woods to do a thingy. And I went in there, and as I was sitting under a tree, and I did my thing, and I cleaned myself with a leaf or something, it was suddenly like I let go of a whole bunch of stuff. I don't know what it was. I'd never experienced this before. And I went into this incredible psychedelic state where I just felt peace within myself, and totally confident and in harmony with everything. And as I walked out of the forest, they all could tell I was suddenly gone into this different vibe, and they all put their palms together and went, "Oh, Swamiji," and they made jokes, and I was kind of, and I just kind of went like that. And they all knew that they didn't need to talk. I didn't need to talk. We all went off, carried on walking, went down to the sand, and I just remember sitting down in the sand, and I went off with my eyes closed into the most incredible psychedelic state I'd ever been into. I started to chant Om, and actually I knew what the symbol was Om, and there was dancing around me Om symbols and things. And then I was just going to very deep thoughts, and I was doing the breathing, and I kind of opened my eyes, and I saw these footprints in the sand, and I just thought Lao Tzu and Jesus have walked this way, and I'm following them, and everything was full of deep symbolism. One of the gang came across with some cigarettes from about 40 yards, was going to give it out, and I said in my mind, "No, man, I don't need it." And he kind of put it back, and it was all, I was in this zone, I was in this far out zone, and that went on for a few hours, because acid goes on, and I was just incredible. And then gradually I came down and down, but it was a beautiful come down, and that had been definitely the most profound trip up till then. So this is about July. Okay, and now after we did this journey, I go back to London, and there's this, I get the results from my O levels, and I've got two. I've got E grade English and C grade art. It's interesting because the O level, I was not very good at grammar, and it was like kind of, you had for the essay you had choices, and I chose the journey. And I just went. I was really stoned. I just had a big joint with my friend Bob, who come up to the park, and he says, "I'm going to sit in the park and give you good vibes for your O level." And I went in there, and I just wrote this journey about going to being in Kathmandu, my fantasy about what it was, meeting with a group of people, us going off to a cave, and when we go into this kind of crystal cave thing, we can hear this om sound coming from the cave. And I just wrote this, I just went, it was a stone trippy fantasy. And I'm sure that it was full of grammatical mistakes. And she most probably read it, whoever, he said, yeah, bad grammar, but good imagination. We'll get him through with an E. So I got an E, and I got my art C, and I went for an interview first with Twickenham College and then Isleworth, and my brother had actually had been a good student, and the name Aleska had weight, and being his brother, and they liked me and they accepted me there, and I thought that was it. That was my destiny, and my parents were relieved. Whew. They got me the anxiety about what their kind of wayward son that they couldn't quite understand. At least he was going to go to college for a couple of years. Also, we all thought, including me. Now, summer holidays, they last a few months, and then normally people go back to school and colleges at the end of the holiday around September. And so this was going to be the second Windsor Festival. And it was much more organized, and much more of us were going, our whole kind of gang. And the gang, of course, during this time, there was Mark Withers and his gang, there was my gang, and there was also Dominic Miles, my brother's friends, his younger brother, Pye Miles in Twickenham, and their whole gang. There were these whole bunch of kind of younger gangs that were all kind of dropping acid, getting high. And I kind of, as the time had gone on, I got closer to all of them, as well as to Andrew Galton, Ray Galton's son, the writer in Hampton Court. He had a fantastic scene at his place. I used to go there sometimes. And okay. So the Windsor Festival was coming, and a group of us, in a group just from where I live, Sue Barnes, another guy, we actually decided to kind of like have our own, because we knew there was going to be a few of us, and we built in my garden, because we did a makeshift geodesic dome made from bamboo and bits of plastic and a tarpaulin that this friend of ours had from his father, and a ground sheet. And we figured out how to do it. We looked at the books, and we did it in the garden. We packed it all up, and that's what we were going to take. When we arrived out of Windsor station, the year before, we'd kind of entered from Ascot, but this time we came from Windsor. As soon as we got out, there were police vans. And there was a bunch of hippies who had kind of got off their trains, and they were kind of hovering, waiting to kind of do this thing, and not sure, because most probably had a bit of hash down their trousers or stash somewhere, and they weren't sure. But then when a few of us had kind of got together, we just started walking towards the park, with our rucksacks on, and the cops all eyeing us up, looking at us, and we were trying to kind of just look ahead, not notice them. And we went through, and there was loads of them all the way up. And then we just headed to where we had gone the year before, and there was people kind of heading towards this mound on the hill, and we ended up there, and we were one of the very early to arrive there that day. We kind of were, really gung-ho young. And as we sat down there and got there and started to put up our this dome, many more people started to come. Rapidly, people were coming. And suddenly the police, they could see this happening, because they didn't really know how many people were coming, and they could see that this thing was going to get big, and they were trying to stop it. And they came over, and they tried to come over to one man, pull up your tent, and he said no. And they came over and they tried to stop him, and then they tried to drag him off, and then these other hippies said, "What are they doing?" And they all jumped on, started fighting with the police and pulling him off, and everything. And then actually they tried to, some more police came, and more people coming, and the police realised, they were outnumbered, and they retreated. And it was like, yeah, fucking pigs, That's what we used to call policemen in England in those days. It was a real kind of this generational thing. So, I mean, they there was this wall, there was a road, the road that went through Windsor Park, and then there was all this area, and they were all way over by the road with their police vans, and the rows of them in their blue uniforms, and you could see the setting sun kind of shining on their badges and buttons, silver buttons, and we called it the blue wall, blue meanies, basically, as they're being called in the baddies in the yellow magical yellow submarine, the blue meanies. That's what we called them in those days. And anyway, hundreds and hundreds of people started to arrive. It was incredible, and we were so absorbed in our little corner. It was only when you came out and you went, "Oh my God, there's so many!" It was like very exciting, and quite very nearby, suddenly there was this big orange tent attached to a van, and it was the Hare Krishnas, very near to where we were. And of course, since this experience with Mick chanting, I made this connection already to the mantra, but I had really no idea of anything behind it. All was that the devotee, when I was at the Trenti show, I forgot to mention this, when I woke up that morning at the Trenti Show Festival before I met Mick, I'd actually gone over to the Krishna tent, and there was this devotee called Charanaravinda making some soup and talking to a couple who really wanted a Bhagavad Gita they were going overland to India. And it was his only copy, and they were haggling about it. And he was describing what he was doing, how he was going to cook this food and offer it to God, and God was going to eat it because every one of his senses could do what any of the other ones do. And I went, wow, he's going to eat. Wow. I went, and I was so tuned into anything spiritual. I thought, why not? Why not? How do I know? That sounds really interesting. That's new. And when he handed us this simple soup, I was actually sitting there and going, so this is Krishna, taste of Krishna, this taste. And I had this very interest. I just immediately thought, yes, this is incredible, just this simple soup. And he gave a little, he had an invitation to the Berry Place Centre, and it just said on it, chant Hare Krishna, the Maha Mantra, and your life will be sublime. And he just said, the more you chant, the better it gets. That's all I knew really about it. So there was the Krishna people. They'd arrived. And that night, I went with Mick and we did a rounds. There was this Sid Rolls, this famous hippie walking around like Merlin with a big hat on and walking around. And there was free food kitchens as well, and communes. Different people in England who were living communally had come down from Bradford, from Leeds, from Sheffield, from all over. And, you know, big signs. Be nice, love one another. It was all very wonderful, and everybody was just this fabulous mood. And after we did this round, we ended up, we could hear the Krishna people had settled, and there was a big kirtan going on. And we just joined in the kirtan, chanting, and it was really, really, really great. And we felt, yeah, Hare Krishnas are here, brilliant, you know. And so. I'm just looking at the time. Okay, I've got to carry on now, really, because I've got to tell this story about what happens. Thank you all for bearing with me. Either that next day or the day after, or whenever it was, it could have been 2 days later, because we were there for a whole week. I think it may have been actually the next day. Our friend Mark Withers, who actually hadn't really dropped acid much, he'd done lots of pot. He'd been given some white lightning acid from a friend from California, and he'd been waiting to get some of this acid. And he just came with quite a lot of it. And he came to his gang came, and there was all our gang, quite a lot of us, all in our tents, smoking and hanging out. And he just said, here's some acid for everybody. And we all took our little dosage, you know. And there was this part of me going, wait a minute. I don't think, not sure. I'd made all this kind of setting. It's a lot going on here. It's not like we had before. But I succumbed to peer pressure as one does in these circumstances. And I just kind of dropped it. That you do that, it doesn't taste of it. I think it was a blotter, just took it. And we all took it, and we all sat around and we started to talk, and then someone said, let's go down and hear the music. you know. So it was like, all right, so you had to get your little kind of stash bag together and your little things to go wandering, because it was quite a way away. Right near us, they had tried to build, they'd built a kind of geodesic structure, massive, and they had a kind of a platform and a sound system. It wasn't covered, but they'd had lots of little things hanging on. So that was one little stage, not far from where we were. And quite further away, because we were on a mound, down at the bottom was a stage, and that's where the main stage, where music, and you could hear that sound, where they'd set up a sound system with generators and things like that. So we went, we'd been very absorbed in our little world. It was a lot going on, and there was loads and loads of people that arrived. There was just tons of people. And as we were started to walk in kind of our little group, we're following one another through tons of people just kind of lying everywhere. You had to kind of walk through and tread over. And I started to come up on the acid quite quickly. And right from the beginning, as I started to come up, I started to feel a bit of nerves. And suddenly I heard, Ben Elton used to call it Captain Paranoia, sitting like on your shoulder. And it was literally my paranoid self speaking to me, going, you're going to have a bad trip. You're going to go have a bad trip. You're going to go down. And I was pretending not to hear this voice. I was going, but the more I kind of like pretended not to hear it, the more it got stronger and a bit more kind of eerie. And I started to get, and I was coming up stronger and stronger, and we were getting closer to the stage. And I was trying to hold it together, and I'm a kind of smiley guy. Most probably look from the outside, I was smiling, but inside I was beginning to kind of feel extremely fearful, like I'd never experienced before. I got into some dodgy places on acid, but I'd never had a full-on bad trip. So we sat down, and then as we sat down and tried to do the normal thing, like the music from the stage, I don't know if it was Hawkwind or something, but it was some kind of offshoot, and it was kind of electronic kind of synthesizing music, and it was a kind of slightly overcast day, and it wasn't sweet and uplifting music. It was kind of grindy and electronic, and it felt demonic, actually. But when you're on a bad trip, everything does. And not only that, my friends started to develop these kind of rubber masks, and kind of like started to turn a bit kind of like weird Bruegel paintings. And I suddenly just thought, I've got to go. I've got to get up. I've got to leave. And I didn't even tell them. I just kind of got my things and I just stood up. And as I walked, there was a whole bunch of crowd people standing. And I bumped into this guy called Billy from Ireland, who was good friends with Hawkwind, and he had stars and things on his eyes, and he was painted, and he had a kind of a robe on. And I said, hey, Billy. He said, hey, man. I said, I'm having a bad trip. Can you help me? He said, yeah, man, follow me. And somehow I started to walk, and I don't know what happened to him. He just kind of merged in the crowd, and I lost him. I don't know what. And all I knew is I had to get away. I had to get away from the people. Kept walking and walking and walking, and I walked to this edge of the park, climbed over a fence. I just had to get away from the people, and as much as away from that noise. And I was, and I found this little bit where a mound went down, and I just crashed on the ground, so that the sound wasn't so loud. And then I just started to descend and fall into darkness and darkness and darkness. And really horrific, freaky thoughts were coming into me. I was panicking, having palpitations. And my mother had a friend whose son had ended up in a mental home. And I thought, this is it. I'm going mad. I'm going to be in a mental home forever. This is it. All these thoughts. And then I remember kind of like looking up at the sky, opening my eyes, and it was like the sky was just ripping apart, and it was like the end of the world, and it was cosmic devastation. But somehow there was something inside of me that's held on to this positiveness. It was holding on. It was like, and I remember it was like, things I was trying to remember from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, like meditating on the clear light of the void. And I said, it was just like, there's no way you can meditate on the clear light or pray to the clear light. What is the clear light anyway? I was not getting any shelter in these kind of ideas, and I couldn't turn this off. And so somehow or other, I decided, closing the eyes, lying down, I'm just going to walk. And I walked kind of this circular route round, so I was away from everybody, and came up on near where we had been camping, where there was less people, and just sat for a bit there, where I could see a few people and kept my breath, and I breathed. I was trying to breathe, and at least seeing other people and everything, I was a little bit out of my kind of thing, but I was still feeling really, 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 really on edge, and I didn't know what to do. And then I suddenly saw some activity happening on that stage, the geodesic stage, and there was a group out to play, and they were the followers of Guru Maharaji. Now, I'm sorry if there's any friends out there who'd been or are followers of Guru Maharaji, but I'm not a big fan. And this all kind of really started from this experience. It was kind of okay. I went up there, and they had these huge big posters of Guru Maharaji with statements like "The King of Kings has arrived," and verses from the Bhagavad Gita extolling this person, Guru Maharaji, be an avatar, God. And I was sitting looking at it, and I was going, what is this? I'm not sure. I was judging the vibes. And then they started playing music and singing this song, and it was quite insipid. It wasn't like really cool music either. It was almost like born again Christian-y, churchy type of singing. For me, that's what it sounded like. And all I remember was this chorus that went, and that's why we love Guru Maharaji. And I only had to hear two kind of choruses, and I just thought, this is not it. And then I just kind of walked away from it. And then suddenly I saw that, where I'd been. And I forgot the Krishna, this big orange canopy, and a group of people just sitting over there. And I thought, that's it, I'm going to go there. And I just walked away from that, went over into the tent and sat down at the periphery and sat there. And when I first got there, there was this American kind of tourist guy who'd come to check out the hippies, and he was sitting next to me and interfering and ridiculing this talk that people were trying to listen to. And everyone looked at him going, shh, shh. And then, he says, made some remarks and went. And as soon as he went, it was like, oh God, that vibe was gone. And I kind of got a bit closer. And I tried to focus on what was being said by this quite young Krishna devotee. And it wasn't really having an impact. But what was beautiful was the mood and the setting. They had all these beautiful posters of Krishna. I specifically remember the picture of Brahma riding on a swan, and Krishna with the cowherd boys sitting by the Jamuna. That was there, and the picture of Brahma sitting on a lotus flower. They were on the side of the van, and from the top of the van they had this kind of orange canopy that was like a bit like a Bedouin tent that was kept up by poles. It was very beautiful, really, and they had an altar with tons of incense. And then I kind of realized, as I was breathing the incense, I realized, wow, somehow or other, this incense had been floating down to where I had been, and I was kind of smelling it, and it was this positive thing that I'd been following, and that was it. It was this scent, it was this smell, and I got there to where the scent was coming from. And just as he was talking, and I was trying, suddenly you heard this getting louder, and he says, oh, the kirtan's going to be back in a minute, and there will be Robertanandan Swami from America will be coming, and he will carry on and give a class. But please, they're going to be coming in, and please, everyone, chant Hare Krishna. So they suddenly came into the tent after doing a kirtan around, a big group of devotees, because there's quite a lot of them there. And this Charanarvindam devotee that I'd met down in Trentish, and he used to do this incredible Indian dance with the nodding of the head, and he came in, and Robertananda was this quite tall a guy with deep set eyes, and he had these black gloves, and he was playing the mridanga, and they were ecstatic. And to tell you the truth, it was amazing. The difference between what I just noticed at the Guru Maharaji tent and this was so tangible. As the sound of the kirtan came, it was like washing over me, and the sound and the whole vibration was just washing off my paranoia, my fear, my anxieties. And I went from kind of exuberance into the sound of this kirtan, and feeling kind of like, my goodness, this is real. This is something's really true going on here. And I'd experienced the mantra before, and it was hallelujah, but it wasn't hallelujah. Hare Krishna. And then Robertanandan Swami sat down, and I moved, I was sitting in my lotus position, and I just had this little vest on, and I had some beads on, not dissimilar than this. And it was a lovely day. It was a lovely day. And it was warm, even if it was overcast. And he sat down there, and it was like he had his breath, because he'd come in there, been a kid, and then he'd sat down, and he'd given and he just said, God is not just light. And just that alone, I went, right, God is not just light. I'd never heard that before, because up until now, everything that I've been reading was and indicating that that's exactly what God was. In fact, they'd limited God to just this one conception that God was light. In fact, the conception really, if you took it down to kind of simplistic, my understanding that I gathered from all this philosophy was that I am spirit, there's a big spirit. There's no distinction between my spirit and that spirit, because there's no shape or form, so there can't be any distinction. And somehow or other, when you get elevated through meditation and spirituality, you will kind of your individuality will merge with that light, and you will become one. I never really thought what that meant and what you do once you've merged into this light, if that's it. But this was the kind of the limits of my theological, I deduced that this is what nearly all of them were saying. And so their ultimate conclusion, and many of these books, is that you are God. There is no difference. You've just got to remember that you are. That was their kind of the philosophy that I picked up from there. And then there's Roberta Nanton going, God is not just light. So I was expecting cliches like we're all like drops of water that go into the rivers that merge into the ocean, and things that I've read before in some of the books I've been reading. But no. And then he kind of went on and on with this philosophy. And the more he started to speak, the more intrigued I came with the idea. And he explained the difference between the part of God and the supreme God. And he talked about bhakti and the nature of you can serve everything by serving the root of creation, by serving God, who's the root. And through the roots, if you put water on the root of the tree, it goes to all the tree. And everything he's saying was just, I was just going, yeah. And then there was a point in it where he'd explained the fact that there is a difference between the individual soul and the supreme Godhead, who had personality and form. This was all quite very, very different to me. But suddenly, I was very high and I wasn't following every little bit, but suddenly I was getting the essence of it. And then there was a point where suddenly it clicked in me. And I kind of had this realization. Of course, how can I be God? There's all those omni things, isn't there? Omniscient, omnipresent. Am I those things? No, I can't even control my bloody mind. What to speak of being simultaneously present in every atom of the universe and creation and in the hearts of all living beings, and consciously moving the sun and the moon and the stars, and let's get real. And suddenly I went, wow. And it was like, I wonder why all these other people are on that other trip. This just makes much more sense. That was basically when the penny dropped. And you could say, I do say that that's almost when I kind of went, yes, I am a servant of God. I am a part. And I went, it was kind of all happening inside of me in psychedelic time and space. And then he also said, he quoted from the Bible that verse, in my Father's house are many mansions. Whatever theologians take that to mean, in my mind, I suddenly saw this kind of incredible realm, this spiritual realm, with all these kind of houses and forms. And I thought, yes, why does this absolute just have to be light? Why can't it be a spiritual realm full of variegated spiritual form? It all just became very kind of, yeah, why not? That's much more interesting. And so he gave this long talk. Now, I don't think I'm going to describe what happened, because there was Oh no, I'm not going to describe it. But there was a bit of a confrontation with some Guru Maharaji people. I'm not going to explain that now at this time, because when I actually saw this thing, I actually went on the side of what Roberta Nundan was saying. I just immediately thought, I'm not into those guys down there with their wishy-washy stuff and their little guru, and it just doesn't make. It's not clicking with me. I don't like it. It's not my thing. This is doing it for me, and there's a sincerity and a purity oozing out of these devotees that's really kind of, you can't miss it. It's there, and he. After giving the talk, he was telling, we're going to give, so while that was happening, some of the other devotees were cooking this incredible dish, halava, that he had an incredible recipe and was very famous. It's made from semolina with butter and raisins, and it's quite sweet and buttery, and he used to put orange in it. And then he offered it, and he said, we're going to offer this now. And he passed it around on pieces of greaseproof paper. And when I ate the prasadam, it was a similar kind of physical experience as I'd had orally and everything from the chanting. The prasadam just went all over my body, and I was just in a kind of bliss. I could almost feel the halva on my toes. It was incredible, and I think I had a second helping. I think they went round, and it was just like, and I hadn't eaten for ages, and then he. After the talk, he did some chanting, and he said there's going to be some prasadam. And then after we'd had the prasadam, he carried on talking. And then he did some more, and he did this a couple of times, and this took a long time. And I just sat there absolutely riveted, kind of edging a little bit forward, bit by bit, so I was near and not at the front. And then, just when he'd finished, he offered over the talk. He said, "I'm going to ask one of the English devotees to speak to you now, who's we've been traveling together around England. He can tell you about what it's like to be a Krishna devotee here in England." And one of my dear friends, Rohini Nandan, he came and gave this talk, and it was as mesmerizing in a very different way than Roberta Nundan. He'd even mentioned he'd lived at the Morning Star Ranch in California. He'd dropped out. He'd sat naked watching the sunrise in the morning. They'd lived in trees. They'd been to India, and now there was Roberta Nundan, Rohini Nundan, ex-English schoolboy, very beautifully spoken, very humble, very much like a monk. You would imagine a monk. I just seen. He looked like he could have stepped out of Brother Sun and Sister Moon. He was so humble, and then he just explained with so much earnestness and sincerity about how austere, and describing the lifestyle of what they did. Every morning rising at 4 o'clock, taking cold showers, and then they would do all these devotional things before breakfast at 9, and then they would do service in the kitchen. They would go on the streets. They would do chanting. Then they would do all these worship and these pujas, and then go to bed at 10. And I was just so impressed. I thought, these people are really, to do what they're doing is so sincere, and I became very attractive. But then what happened was my LSD wear off after his talk, and I felt my body, and it was really late in the night, and I walked out of the Hare Krishnas, did my respects, and I was knocked for 6. I don't know what had happened to me. I'd been lost in the Hare Krishna Absolute Truth Show. That's what I call it. Somehow or other, it was almost like the whole thing had been staged for me to have this transformative experience. And I wandered around, and I couldn't really relate to everything, but it was lovely and magical and sparkly. And then I went back to our geodesic dome, and there was all of our mates lounging all around, and I walked in. They hadn't seen me for ages and hours since I left them at that group and wandered off, and they saw me, and they just went, "Hey Mark, how you doing?" And I just said, "Yeah, well, I've just been at the Hare Krishnas," and it was like, Hare Krishna, they've got you, and they were like that, and I said, well, maybe they have, or something like that. And I could see that, and then I went over and sat down next to my friend Mick. We had a little place in the corner. We built a kind of annex off from the, and I just kind of told him briefly what had happened, and he was like, "Wow, that's cool." I said, "What do you think I should do?" He said, "Nothing." He said, "Just have a bit of this sandwich and go to bed, have a sleep." And that's exactly what I did. Can't remember. I just crashed out, and in the morning, as soon as I woke up, I just thought, I've just got to go back to there. that tent and just see what was that? Was that all just tripping, or what was that? And I just kind of got up, went out, and they were having some little talk at the tent. It was kind of early, and I just sat down there. And of course I wasn't tripping now. Of course there was the after effects, and I just sat there at the edge, and it didn't feel any different than the day before. The vibes and everything were the same. And really, that's really when I hadn't got the name yet, but that's where the Mathuradas that most people know of me was born, really, born again, Hare Krishna. Well, I'm not born again. Well, I actually do believe that the reason that at such a young age, this all became so natural to me and it was so rapid, somehow I had to get through some karmic thing to get to this point, because basically this was my destiny and it was something that I'd started in my previous lifetimes, and I just had to carry on. And many Christian devotees and people on spiritual paths, they realize that. And I have this very, very strong affinity to India and Indian culture. So that's what I believe. So thank you for hearing me up to this point of the story. I'm not going to be sharing anything more tomorrow. I've got some other things I've got to do. I might be carrying on this. I will be carrying on this story because I'm going to explain to you what happens next. Because what happened was, literally, this is like September, and still there was this possibility of going to college. And then there was this option, because just a few months before the beginning of that summer, George Harrison had donated this place in a place called Letchmore Heath, not far from Watford, outside of London, that was originally called Pigot's Manor, that was going to be called Bhaktivedanta Manor. They'd had it for 3 months and they'd been developing it, and Prabhupada had been there for a while, and they were kind of just inviting everybody, please come and visit us. And so there was this thing, I'd met this group of people I wanted to live with. I never thought they would be Hare Krishnas. Still wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I was definitely going to take up that invitation and check them out. And I'll tell you the story about what happens when I tell my mother and I meet my family, and it's the next part of the story, but that won't be tomorrow. And I think that what I'm going to do now is... because I touched on it just now with the kind of this whole thing about, this was a big turning point for me, going from a kind of impersonalism, kind of focusing on an abstract form of the absolute truth, to the idea that the absolute truth could have personality and form. And this was a very unique angle, and it was something that Prabhupada had introduced really for the first time. This tradition is very big in India, the Vaishnava lineage, with this philosophy. But up until now, no one had come with this teaching, and it had this very big effect on me and on nearly all the devotees, people that became Krishna devotees, even though they may have come by different ways. Part of the kind of this idea and conception that Prabhupada brought, and the power of the Mahamantra, were the big transformative things that attracted us and to this path of Krishna worship. So I'm just going to have a sip. I'll get more theological tomorrow and get into this story, which is about this big quandary about how Eastern philosophies deal with this, the unity, the one, and the manyness, you see. So this is a song that me and Prana wrote about this subject, and here we go. It's called The One and the Many. From the day that time began, we've been searching for the master plan to understand the world and what we are. So many stories have been told, endless ideas bought and sold. revelations, dreams and philosophies. Tangle in a web of philosophical speculation, false conclusions and hypotheses. Struggle with an overload of information, offering no release. Who can see the wood, not for the trees? Who can see the wood, not for the trees? In this world of duality, of unity and diversity, all is the play of the many and the one. When will we have eyes to see the higher forms of reality, when our delusions and confusions are all gone? Because some of them say identity is an illusion, the absolute no form nor qualities. They deny their soul and the source of their creation, or claim they are same as the Almighty. Oh Lord, what a catastrophe. Oh, can't see the wood, not for the tree. When a green bird flies into a green tree, she appears to lose herself in all the greenery, but she's still singing there quite happily. She hasn't lost her individuality, oh no. This is the story of the many and the one. So many rays of light bursting from the sun, how inconceivably we are different and one at the same time. At the same time, constant and intimate, like the waves and the sea. Finite and infinite, share the same qualities, but the source of creation is independent and free. Why? Having infinite potentiality. Sorry. Radhe, 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 Radhe. Jai, 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 Shri Radhe. Radhe, 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 Radhe. Jai, 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 Shri Radhe. Radhe, 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 Radhe. Jai, 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 Shri Radhe. Radhe, 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 Radhe. Jai, 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 Shri 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 Radhe. Radhe. Radhe 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 Radhe. Jai 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 Shri Radhe Shyam. Jai Radhe Jai Shyam. Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham. Thank you so much again, all of you, for allowing me to be able to share all of these songs and this story with you. I personally like personal stories but what I've tried to do with my personal story is include it in a much bigger social context and a generational context, because many people have gone through many of the similar things that I've gone through, and many of the Krishna devotees may have gone through specifically similar parts of this journey, and many of the second generation and third generation of Krishna devotees, because this was all happening in 1973, the earlier Krishna devotees are older than me. Many are second and third generation. They might be kind of wanting to know more about what their parents went through and what was it that led them to join this Krishna movement, whereas they were born into it. Okay, lots of love, big hugs to everybody, and I know that everybody's dealing with this situation that we're going through in different ways, and we all have our own ways of dealing with it, and all the things that are arising from it. And I wish you all the best with. I have a phrase which is various strategies of dealing with life, which is what we all develop. And we've all got our own idiosyncratic strategies for dealing with life, which are sometimes incomprehensible to others. And I think it's a time where we have to be a little bit kind of, even if we totally disagree with what people are saying, and we can have different of opinions, we have to accept the fact that they have that choice. Everyone's got the freedom to believe what they want, and if we become adamant that our way of looking at things is the only way, it's just going to create more and more divisiveness. And as our other song Jar Love we sing, we are connected to all. We are connected to all. We don't have to be connected with a bunch of shit, but we can also spread love, and we don't need to kind of like lose friendship with people that we have lots of nice dear connections with just because we maybe differ on certain things. Lots of love. Stay safe. Big hugs to all. Hari Om.